The time has come. Execute Order 66.
Yes, my lord.
Of the various adversaries to a legitimate rightist movement in America, there's perhaps no sneakier and internally more damaging cabal than what Paul Gottfried calls Conservatism Incorporated, or Con Inc. Con Inc. is the various distributed, media-approved, or tolerated factions of the erstwhile conservative movement, formerly headed by William F. Buckley and still spearheaded by his magazine National Review. What Con Inc. does is serve as a gatekeeper for allowable, supposedly right-wing thought in America. Terms of discourse, as with most Western societies, are set by the left, but Con Inc. serves to frame the boundaries of acceptable discourse for the right in a conversation started by leftists, while purging dissenters from its ranks or helping destroy the careers of those right-wingers unwilling or unable to get with the program. A notable example of those purged by Conservatism Incorporated is Paul Gottfried, who was banned from appearing in any of their media outlets after, for a time, being allowed on, and had his chances of getting a professorship at various universities scuttled by members of Con Inc. Other victims of the purge include, but are not limited to, Joseph Sobran, Samuel T. Francis, John Derbyshire, the John Birch Society, and more recently, Michelle Malkin. Con Inc. was also opposed to the populist Trump presidency, at least when it was still unclear that he would win, with National Review publishing a whole issue titled Against Trump in February of 2016. While some of these people, like Dennis Prager or Glenn Beck, would in time come around to the Trump presidency, a large chunk of them would remain never-Trumpers, including the odious likes of Bill Kristol and David French. For Conservatism Incorporated's underhandedness, gatekeeping, attacks on anyone legitimately voicing a rightist alternative, and their constant gaslighting and bamboozling of well-meaning, if confused, American conservatives, I've decided to begin a new on and off again series, which I call In Conserving Nothing, we'll examine, carve up, and analyze pieces put out by Con Inc. for the purposes of understanding where Con Inc. goes off the rails, how it thinks, and most importantly, its tactics. And what better piece to begin with than a recently published article in National Review titled What Buckley's Fight with the Birchers Tells Us About Movement Purges by Dan McLaughlin. This article was prompted by the recent removal of Congresswoman Liz Cheney from her position as chairman of the House Republicans Conference. McLaughlin says that Cheney's removal from her position as a leader in the GOP allows her to be more open, but that the reasons for her removal are troubling. McLaughlin argues that if anyone should be purged, it's those who continue to, quote, lie about the fortified election of 2020. He entirely omits the fact that she voted to impeach President Trump for the so-called Capitol Hill insurrection, which in reality was nothing more than a bit of hooliganism after Trump had said that the marchers should go peacefully to the Capitol Hill. McLaughlin goes on to say that in regards to the election, quote, in some places, meaning the election, was conducted in flagrant disregard of the law, but it was not stolen, and anyone who continues to claim otherwise should be seen in the future as an unreliable liar, end quote. Now, I need to be careful here for the purposes of YouTube, but we know for a fact a number of things. First, there are certain vast statistical anomalies. There was also improper changes to voter laws over the heads of state legislatures. And there was no less than a full story in Time magazine talking about a coordinated conspiracy to fortify, their own words, the U.S. election. For these reasons, there are rightfully big question marks about the 2020 U.S. election for a lot of people. For McLaughlin to acknowledge flagrant disregard for the law, as he puts it, Yet to call people who question the results of the 2020 US election unreliable liars is stupid, dishonest, or betrays immense ignorance on his part. What this really is narrative crafting by Conservatism Incorporated to try and put the cork back in the bottle with the GOP base, who do feel cheated and rightfully disenfranchised by a Republican Party more concerned with its donors than its voters. After this, McLaughlin goes on to use Cheney's removal as an opportunity to talk about Con Inc.'s history of purges. He goes on to say that Bill Buckley, the founder of National Review, was very hesitant to purge people on the right, including people from the John Birch Society. Quoting from the article, National Review was built, as much as anything, around answering the question, what is conservatism? Essential to that endeavor was disputation among varying points of view, and the first decade of National Review was nothing if not rich in disputation. End quote. This is pretty clear acknowledgement that National Review was designed to define and then gatekeep conservatism from day one, once its official position had been established. McLaughlin continues, reading from the article, a major motivation for this fusion, meaning fusion of ideas, was the understanding that conservative people and institutions need to unite, and that in order to do so, they had to rally around the ideas they shared rather than being divided by the ideas on which they disagreed, the drive for common good rather than theoretical coherence. End quote. It should be clear to just about everybody that this has entirely failed. The history of conservatism is a history of failure on one level after another. What conservative institutions there are have largely been converged at this point, including the churches. As for uniting behind ideas, that's all well and good if they're winning ideas, but these so-called conservative ideas have gone nowhere but continually leftward. The article goes on to say that in his attack on John Birch Society, Buckley got support from conservative heavy hitters and first directly targeted Robert Welch Jr., the founder of the John Birch Society. He tried to get Robert Welch to step down as head, but when the John Birch Society wouldn't throw him under the bus, he widened his attack to include the whole organization. Ostensibly, his reason to purge Welch and then later the John Birch Society as a whole was because of Welch's monomania about communist infiltration and efforts by Democrats and moderate Republicans to tie National Review to some of the crazier ideas of the Birchers. One of the problems with this approach is that the left by no means takes Buckley's advice for themselves, and for good reason. It doesn't work. The left seeks zero validation from its opposition and downplays or ignores the more fringe elements within their coalition. This is exactly the opposite of what Con Inc. does. The result has been a continual dragging of the conservative movement leftward as it ejects right-wingers in an effort to placate moderates and leftists it seeks to ingratiate itself with. Both Paul Gottfried and Tom Woods in a conversation speculated that the primary reason why the John Birch Society and many others were ejected from the conservative movement was really because of foreign policy differences. The John Birch Society, Murray Rothbard, and many others of the paleocons were or became either isolationist or extremely skeptical of the foreign policy aims of the United States government. McLaughlin ends his article with the following, quoting from the article. If all this sounds familiar, it's because the stakes of the Cheney fight are much the same as the stakes that the Buckley-Welch fight were. There have been laughable efforts to argue that Cheney's ouster is about a disagreement over ideas, or about the class of person who should control the Republican Party. But it's not about either of those things. It's not really even about the willingness to personally tolerate Donald Trump. Cheney, after all, voted with Trump 93% of the time while he was president. While where and how Cheney chose to talk about the party's divisions may have sealed her fate, the core question that separates her from her critics is a straightforward matter of truth versus falsehood, and wouldn't be an issue at all if Trump didn't remain deeply invested in demanding that Republicans perpetuate his lies about the election. Today, as much as ever, conservatives ought to be focused on maintaining a united front against the left's assaults on our culture, our economy, and our system of government. We should not be eager to turn inward hunting for enemies. But if there is one thing we must not tolerate, it is an insistence on keeping alive lies that lead members of our movement away from that fight." End quote. For all the talk about how conservatives need to band together to fend off the attacks of the left, Con Inc. is perfectly happy to unperson anyone who doesn't fit within their rather small Overton window. For evidence of this, you need look no further than the opinions allowed on such austere platforms as Fox News, National Review, The Bulwark, the Heritage Foundation, or the now defunct Weekly Standard. The positions of these publications are nothing if not milquetoast, tepid, or irrelevant. They constantly punch right and don't seem to firmly believe all that strongly in anything except proud support for Israel, looking for fights internationally, and of course, getting rich. It seems almost these people are shielded from reality, and perhaps they are. They're in a small club, and not only is their club small, but it seems unaware that their united front against the left's assaults on our culture, our economy, and our system of government has been entirely ineffective. Or perhaps they do know, and they just don't care. Perhaps the main thing legitimate rightist movements or individuals in the United States should worry about conserving is conserving themselves from the conservative movement. What Con Inc. does have, though, is relatively high amounts of funding, which is also probably why they don't mind us removing ourselves from their orbit. They don't need us, as they see it, and they don't rely on populists or right-wingers to butter their bread. Fortunately, technology, at least to some extent, is on our side these days. There was a time when it was disastrous for right-wing columnists or intellectuals to have old man Buckley execute Order 66 on their asses, but at least now, the technology and networking capacity exists for us to hopefully build our own institutions. And with any luck and enough time and degradation, Con Inc. just might even purge itself. This has been Mr. Patriarch. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, please give this video a like or a comment if you enjoyed it. The show's grown quite a bit in the past couple of months, and I want to thank all of you for helping it along. You can find the backup for this channel over on Odyssey, which I'd encourage all of you to subscribe to in case this channel is ever threatened. Also, if you want to support the show directly, please consider becoming a patron on Subscribestar. All supporters there at any level who help this channel reach its first, rather modest goal will have a goodie coming their way. I'm thinking I might do a supporters-only stream or video on a topic of your choosing, or maybe even just a casual call-in show or something. Let me know in the comments what you'd like. Links are in the description. I'm of course grateful for any support you're willing to give, and I look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Patriarch, out.